Florida State made headlines very recently when the athletic director, Michael Alford, said at a Board of Trustees meeting, it's impossible for things to stay the same how they are right now in the ACC. Pulled up some numbers that were pretty convincing. Says the Big Ten's making right around $80 million. The SEC is making right around $72 million per a team. We're Florida State. We're doing much more than pulling our weight, and we're making only $42 million a year. You expect us to compete with the big boys, but we're not making money with the big boys. How does that figure? Well, kind of got the gears churning a little bit for a lot of us across the industry. And the move to the SEC or the Big Ten, we're going to focus on the SEC for this conversation, I think is relatively imminent. And it makes a ton of sense. First and foremost, it's mutually beneficial. The SEC gets what they want. Florida State gets what they want. And what does Florida State want? Florida State wants to get what they're worth. They talked about it a lot during that meeting. They said the typical ACC school draws in 70% less viewership than we do here at Florida State. We're a national brand. Okay, people know about the Noles from coast to coast. You turn on your TV and you know when we're playing ball. And the numbers indicate as much. We generate 15% of what the ACC brings in from a media standpoint. We're only getting 7% of that. We're only getting 7% of what we're bringing in. How does that work out for us? And the reason why he said it's impossible, he being Michael Alford, the reason why he said it's impossible for us to stay the same right now and keep the status quo is not because it's tough to keep the lights on at Florida State. It's not because $42 million a year isn't paying the bills. The reason why it's impossible is because Florida State expects to compete with those other national powers in the Big Ten and the SEC that are bringing in $80 million and $72 million respectively. And here's the deal, man. In college football, power and relevance looks a lot like finances. And finances, what does that equate to? Resources. And when you have the best resources, when you have as much resources as the next man, then you have the opportunity to compete for what you want to compete to. All right? So if we want to compete with Georgia for national titles, if we're at Florida State, but we're bringing in $30 million a year less than them, y'all know over time that gap is going to eventually widen. Now, it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to for Florida State. But the fact of the matter is, when you expect to do more than just win 8 games a year, you got to have the resources to go along with it. And that's what Michael Alford's saying. We expect to be up here. We expect to be creme de la creme. We expect to compete with all the national powers. We got to bring in the kind of resources in order to do that. Really quickly, though, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, love to have you along for the ride. Also, follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at JD Piquel. Now, like I said, it's mutually beneficial. So Florida State gets what they want, more money, less problems, more resources, more opportunity to compete how they want to compete, how they expect to compete now in Tallahassee, Florida. And the ACC would lose Florida State, but the SEC would gain a major brand. And if you're the SEC, you're just sitting back and kind of watching this whole thing unfold. And if you were to add Florida State, what do you get? You get more eyeballs nationally. Now, what do more eyeballs equate to? More money. And like I said, more money equates to a bigger pie for everybody, and a bigger pie in today's college football, the way that college athletics is heading towards, it puts you in an even more dominant position right now. It makes all the sense in the world to add Florida State to the SEC. And I could see the conversation for the Big Ten if it was just strictly about money. And at the end of the day, maybe it is. But the SEC, to me, is where Florida State would want to be logistically, because you get to still compete in your backyard with Florida, get to compete with Georgia, get to compete with Alabama, and you slap the SEC patch on the jersey, the sticker on the back of the helmet. You know how much more juice that gives you on the recruiting trail? You know how much more people will, I don't want to say take you seriously, but it definitely adds a little bit to it, all right? It definitely is a factor that would come into play, because we look at the numbers of NFL players that get drafted every year, and the SEC, year in and year out, just cleans house. So for Florida State to say, yes, we have produced a lot of NFL players, but now you look at us in the same light of the Georgias and the Floridas and the Alabamas, It's good company to be in. Okay, and you can also pitch, hey, whatever kind of effort you put on tape, it's not going to be questioned. Jimmy 5-star. When you come to Florida State, you come play for us in this conference, nobody's going to question what you did on tape. They'll say you did that against Bama, you did it against Tennessee. We like your resume. And I don't want to dunk on the ACC completely here, but just the fact of the matter is a scout's going to look at your tape against Alabama differently than they would against NC State from a broad strokes perspective. All right? Now, it makes all the sense in the world logistically. Why is that? Because Florida State right now has the high ground. They are the hot brand. They have the leverage on the ACC. The ACC needs Florida State more than Florida State needs the ACC. All right, Florida State can leave and be fine. Now, I understand there are some legalities that have to be worked out here. We just saw what happened with Texas and OU, right? We've seen how powerful these people are, and we've seen how much money can be exchanged to make some things happen. In the day and age of college football, the way this is headed, do not be surprised if this ends up getting resolved quickly. If you catch my drift. If Florida State wants more money and the ACC can't make it happen, don't be surprised if someone forks over the right amount of cash to get them out of the ACC. And what the ACC would have to do is say, hey, other schools, we want to keep Florida State. It helps us have, more revenue as a whole. It helps us as a conference. Are you okay with us taking some of the money out of your pocket to give it to Florida State? Who in their right mind in the ACC is going to sign off on that? You think Miami's going to say, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead and give Florida State some of our money to keep them around. No, of course not. That's not going to happen. So I don't see a world where Florida State ends up getting more money from the ACC. Now, the TV deals, right? That's what this is all about. This is what's controlling a lot of the greenbacks right now. ESPN and ABC own the rights, starting in 2024, to both the SEC and the ACC. So you're avoiding the situation where you have this big bidding war between ESPN and Fox of, no, we want to get the rights. No, we want to get the rights. If I'm ESPN, I think the argument could be made, we would rather have Florida State a part of the SEC. Let's bolster that brand. It's going to super conference era anyway. We're going to get there eventually. Let's make that thing happen now and get that whole thing rolling. So I think this is going to happen. When? I don't know. But don't listen to all these reports that are going to circulate saying too much money to be paid to get them out. Hey, we can't figure it out with the contracts. We can't figure it out with what was signed with the grant of rights, whatever it ends up being. There's going to be a lot of smoke screens. Just keep your eye on the ball here. And that is Florida State is making more money for the ACC than they believe they should be getting back. And when Florida State needs to get paid, there's a lot of other places they can go to get paid. There's a lot of people with power and deep pockets involved right now. Super Conference era is very much so upon us. Texas and OU started that domino effect. I guess it was now a year and a half, 2 years ago. It's happening. It's happening. I very much so believe Florida State will be that next domino to fall. The SEC makes a lot of sense. Like I said, geographically and by nature of where they recruit and who they compete with, you'd probably like to be in the SEC. But I wouldn't turn my back if the Big Ten came knocking either, if I'm in Tallahassee. You're a national brand. You got a lot of weight you can throw around right now. I think they're going to use it. So Florida State, I 1,000% anticipate will be moving conferences here. When? Who knows? But it's going to happen. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.